All right, good morning. Going to get started. We are recording this webinar and we will be posting it to the OSP website so that you'll be able to view it at your leisure and forward to anybody who couldn't make it. As this is a webinar, use the Q&A function if you have any questions. You can put them in there. I'll stop periodically to answer any questions. What we'll start with is a short PowerPoint of LESA 2.0, starting with kind of where we were with the original LESA, observations we made, how we came up with the enhancements to the process, an overview of the major changes you'll see, and then we'll drop into the system, what it looks like inside LESA, and what you can expect. Okay. All right, so starting with our prior history with LESA, we went live with the first RFP on November 24th, 2020. So roughly 2.5 years ago. But we really didn't start to see a significant number of RFPs until the summer and fall of 2021. To date, we've had 99 sourcing projects that were started in the system. And we've got this graph that shows the average publication time by quarter. So the y-axis is the amount of time, and the x-axis is starts with November of 2020 through to present. So as we can see, we've made some significant strides. The slope of this line is fairly steep downwards, but we're still not happy with the results. We want that to be steeper. We want to get the process down much quicker, get RFPs on the street as fast as we can. So that's where the genesis of coming up with LESA 2.0 came from. If you remember back when we did start LESA, we said one of the main things we wanted to do was continuous improvement. We've done that up until now, but we labeled this LESA 2.0 because it brings in a significant number of changes, whereas before we were doing tweaks as we learned things. This was kind of rethinking how we were doing stuff. Right. So as we're looking at the data with LESA, as you know, we have a lot of transparency into what's going on in each project. So we began to look for bottlenecks, and we identified 3 major bottlenecks. The first one was the kickoff meeting. We're finding in many cases it was taking a month or more to get the kickoff meeting scheduled. And we dug into that. Looked like it was because there were a large number of participants in that meeting. Second bottleneck we saw was with the administrative and general information document. For whatever reason, we were seeing that single document taking up a significant chunk of resources, many rounds of review, many cases more than the scope. And then the third bottleneck we saw was with the evaluation committee review of RFP documents. Those were taking a month, and this is where each member of the evaluation committee is reviewing all the pieces of the RFP. So we're seeing that take a significant amount of time, and we weren't really getting very many revisions back from the evaluation committee. We also were looking at other spots that maybe weren't bottlenecks, but things we thought we could improve. A lot of this was based on feedback from many of you on this webinar, as well as our suppliers. So first spot was the format and setup we had for our documents and event language, where you had to look in multiple places to kind of get the whole concept of the RFP. And then the second was in the document creation review process. It just felt like there was significant room for improvement there. Okay, so with identifying those, we really started in earnest on enhancing this process a little over a year ago. In addition to our internal data, observations, discussion with agencies and suppliers, we also worked with several outside entities, some formally, some informally, but major discussions and put a major impact on what we've ended up with in LESA 2.0. Where NASPO, which is the National Association of State Procurement Officers, and Simplar, which some of y'all might recognize them. We bring them in for training over the past year. But we also work with Center for Procurement Excellence, which to give them a plug, if you're not already doing or attending some of their events, they have a free RFP doctor segment monthly that they do. It's like the third or fourth Thursday in a month. So Google that, attended. They've got lots of good information and cutting edge stuff with RFPs there. And then we also discussed with various other states, such as Florida, Ohio, Michigan, and Tennessee, just to get an idea of what they were doing, what was working, what wasn't working. So through all this research and everything, one of the main things that kept coming up was the need to have the role clearly defined between procurement and the agency. So the best practices we found is having the agency be responsible for project execution. This is kind of, an obvious thing. The agency needs the good or the service to perform or to help them perform what their public function is. So when you really distill that down, that's the scope. And that's, what you're submitting to us is the scope, and we need that really good scope. So with that role, agency needs to focus on the scope. OSP is procurement, and we're responsible for the overall conduct of the procurement itself. So that is the RFP process, the structure, ensuring that the procurement best practices are followed and that the procurement is fair, open, and transparent. So with those in mind and trying to focus our efforts there, we began to see LESA 2.0 take shape. Main goals in LESA 2.0 to simplify things for agency and suppliers, and speed up the publication process. We think those will work hand in hand. All right. So starting with the changes in the sourcing request, we'll go through major changes to the sourcing request, the sourcing project, and then the templates documents, if you will, before we get in to see what these actually look like. So first thing with the sourcing request is there are no additional steps being added. They're actually fairly minor changes that, unless you're doing lots of sourcing requests, you wouldn't even notice that something had changed with them. First change is going to be when you're creating the sourcing request. We removed the first two questions that you saw down in the template question section. First question was asking you what type of RFP you thought you were submitting. That's whether it's consulting, complex, social services. The second question was if you perform market research. So in the first question about what classification of the RFP, we don't really need you to send that. Well, actually, over the next year, we've been tasked with better defining consulting versus complex services. So OSP will look at your scope that you've submitted and come up with the appropriate classification there. And then for market research, the same thing. If we're reading through your scope and we think maybe we need to pause things and go do market research, we'll do it at that time. Second change you will notice is the definitions and acronyms document has changed. It's still there. It just looks a little different. It has one section that has what are being called standard terms and conditions, or standard definitions and acronyms. And then a second spot for RFP specific or agency specific definitions and acronyms. And that's where you'll insert things like your agency's acronym or definitions for the scope. As I mentioned, we'll look at that document in just a few minutes so that you can see what it looks like and won't be surprised the next time you create a sourcing request. The final change is we removed the evaluation committee group from the team tab on the sourcing request. That was something that seemed to slow down the sourcing request a little bit because you had to pause and ask OSP to create accounts for some of the people who needed to be on your evaluation team. So we've moved that there, and they'll be added later on during the sourcing project, but we don't need them up front with the sourcing request. Okay. Moving on to the sourcing project, this is where we're going to see the most changes. And most of those are going to be prior to RFP publication. A lot of it dealing with the revision process and creating the RFP content. Okay. So if you'll remember, the first bottleneck that we had identified, it was with the kickoff meeting. So to eliminate that bottleneck, our kickoff meeting is going to be with the project lead. So it'll be the OSP spot and the project lead, which should allow us to get that scheduled quickly. At most we're looking at maybe 3 people whose calendars need to sync up instead of 10, 15, 20, however many were previously going. And the purpose of the kickoff meeting is slightly changing. It's to introduce yourselves with each other, because one of the big focuses in the 2.0 process is going to be developing a partnership between the state procurement analyst and the project lead. You'll be working very closely together to kind of get everything done moving quickly. Okay. Another thing that you'll see with that partnership is that we found in many cases, we have finite resources at the agency, you have finite resources as well. Mostly that's time that you can devote to certain projects. So when an agency has an RFP assigned to an analyst, it's taking up their time, whether it's being worked on or not. They still have to do check-ins, and all of these things add up, even if they're on pause, if we want to use that term. So a way to help that in projects where agencies are ready to move, to not slow those down, what you'll see is more RFPs being canceled if you're unable to efficiently complete the tasks. What we found in LESA, it's a simple process to restart those. All the documents are still saved, so you can restart exactly where you were left off. It just will allow a more efficient allocation of those resources. So instead of having to focus and keep your mind on a project that's stalled and not moving anywhere, we can devote that time to somebody who's ready to go. See a question. Somebody having audio problems. I hope that's not everybody. If it is, or I guess if but anybody else is having audio problems, please put it in the chat if we got a significant number. Okay, we're hearing just fine. Okay. That's good to hear. The recording should work fine when we post that. So if you are having audio problems and can't hear anything live right now, hopefully that's resolved in the recording. Okay. All right. So focus on that partnership between the project lead and the state procurement analyst. Now, when you see when we punch over the system and see what the new tasks look like, you'll see that's really built in. The idea is that, you know, you'll become best friends throughout the process. Right. Another thing, we will keep the modular process. That's having the individual documents out. But what you will see is there are fewer documents. I think right now there's a single task that sends like 8 documents to you. We've got that down to 4 or 5 documents that you work on, but they're shorter as well. And some of them should fly by. Okay. And the reason we're keeping that modular, that's an agile procurement methodology. The idea being it speeds it up by being able to focus your attention in a single spot instead of seeing all this stuff together. Okay. We've already talked, well, actually, we haven't gotten to the meeting-based revision process. So another opportunity for improvement that we had identified was that revision process. We've trialed this on a few projects and it appears to work extremely well. But it'll be, for most projects, weekly or bi-weekly meetings, usually towards the beginning of the week. With action items afterwards. So if we're focusing on the scope of work, instead of just sending it back and forth with comments or sometimes just red lines with no comment on it, having the meeting will provide context for those. So you can discuss kind of why you're wanting to revise something. And then the takeaway and action item is, you know, making the revision that y'all discussed, rather than just continuing to send stuff back and forth. What we've seen is that seems to greatly speed up the review process and reduces the number of rounds of revision. And then a final major change there is previously we were bringing in the evaluation committee right up front. Now we're bringing them in. We'll have a second kickoff meeting just prior to publication where we bring in the evaluation committee. They won't participate in that review process, which will eliminate our third bottleneck we saw. Instead, we'll give them a copy of the RFP. They can read it. If they see any problems or questions they want to have, they can send those in. If it turns out it is a major issue that we did need to change, by that point, the RFP will already be published, and it's just a simple process to change the RFP through an addendum. Okay, so the question I'm seeing is for an IT project where OTS is doing something on behalf of an agency, who is the project lead? For those, most of what we've seen on those, it's there'll be 2 project leads, a project lead for OTS and a project lead for the on behalf of agency. And that's fine. Even without OTS being in the process, we have seen some agencies want 2 project leads. We can do that. It's when you start getting into more than 2 that you're gonna see some pushback from our office. because again, the more people you add, the more complicated things get, the longer they take. So. Okay, so this main things on the project, it's only 4 bullet points, but that's actually ties into probably 15 tasks that are being changed once you get into LESA. All right, and the final thing we're changing, this is a large significant change, is we've got an RFP template. So we start off with the modular pieces of the RFP, but before publication, we combine them all into a single document. In that single document at this point, the agency's already reviewed the language that fits in with their role. So once we get into the document, it doesn't allow for revisions. It'll still go back to the agency so you can look at it and insert comments in it. But the idea here is that everything should be done already. Okay. One of the major changes you'll see in there, and this is something that our state procurement analysts even have a limited ability to change, are standard terms and conditions. So for those of you familiar with the ITB process, this is kind of similar to how those work, where you have a boilerplate that goes out that LeGov adds in, that nobody to change it is like a several week process with OTS. So you have this boilerplate language, and then that can be modified by special terms and conditions that you add. Usually that's like attachment A to an invitation to bid. So we've borrowed that concept with the RFP template, standard terms and conditions, and these are RFP terms and conditions. So it's just describing how the RFP process is going to proceed and what the rules are around the RFP itself. Those aren't going to change. So we have those standards set in, think of it like boilerplate. They're there, they're not changing. We have a document that will go through with the agency called special terms and conditions, and that's where you add in your RFP specific language that may need to be in there. So, you know, if it's federally funded and you have specific federal clauses that have to be included, those are special terms and conditions. The standard terms and conditions, what we did is we went through everything we were including, and we identified what belongs in every RFP and what doesn't. So things that are in every RFP are in standard terms. Things that aren't would be added to special terms and conditions. One example of that would be like Hudson Veteran Initiative. That's not in standard terms and conditions because not every RFP has it. So instead it's added as a special term and condition where it's needed. And then the final thing we've got on the template are standard proposal submittal forms. So if you've done a LESA project now, you've seen the proposer questionnaire that we develop, and we'll put them in as individual questions. If I've done one lately, we kind of switched the answers to those to being attachments after finding out that it was difficult to grade answers to questions that were multiple paragraphs and directly entered into LESA. What we've got with proposal submittal forms is now each evaluation factor that you have will have a certain number of questions developed by the agency and the SPA collaboratively. But it'll be on one document. So you'll have the question, a space for the proposers to enter their answer, and then the way they're attaching that is just the entire section is what goes into LESA. That probably sounded really confusing. It's not, and we'll see in just a second. So with that, we're going to start the demo. portion of this. We'll start with what these documents look like, starting with the definitions and acronyms, and then jump to the single template, and then to the individual pieces that you'll be working on with the state procurement analyst. Okay. We'll start with definitions and acronyms. So you'll see this in LESA. If you created a sourcing request starting yesterday, this is the document for definitions and acronyms that's in there. You'll see standard definitions. Again, these are what we'll see in a second, kind of where those fit. And then down below are project specific definitions. And this is where you would add in everything that's specific to the project that's being worked. Under the current, you would go try to find, where alphabetically you would need to add in a new definition and add it there. Potentially revise some of these, and then there'd be this revision process on should we change the definition. So now we're just going to focus on what's different. If something up here needs to change, like say for some reason agency needs to change, or you think agency needs to change, or maybe state needs to change, you can put agency or state down under project specific definitions with what the new definition that you want it to be is there. Okay, so that's that. We'll now jump to the LESA 2.0 template. Okay, so you can see it's 45 pages long. This replaces everything we had before. So we'll see in the system will show a live one that follows this format. Instead of having all these different sections, when it comes to the event in LESA, there's only 2 sections now. The first section is the RFP with this document attached. And then the second is the proposal with spots for the proposers to submit their proposals. Okay. All right, so it starts with the RFP overview. It just has some condensed information about it. Process, what the scope's going to look like, or where the scope is found really is what that is. How to submit, how to send questions, what the evaluation process is going to look like. So along with the schedule of events, as we can see. Your first several projects, you'll go through in detail with the state procurement analyst what these things look like and how they are. So we'll use this webinar, especially based on time that we have left, to kind of hit the highlights and have you see it so that when you see it for the first time in the system, it's not this huge shock. Okay, so we can see here, we've got several different attachments, A through H. They're all in the same document, though. We don't attach those separately. It's just a way of keeping everything organized. All right. Our standard terms and conditions. Again, as if you flip through this and when you see it, it's going to look a lot like that administrative and general information document. But it starts with the definitions. We've got governing law and venue, how the RFP documents are, what the process we're going to follow for addenda is, all the standard things. We didn't minor changes to the language based on agency feedback and just looking at it again. But for the most part, all the language is the same. It's just structured a little differently. Information in here about the proposal, how they change their proposal, withdraw their proposal, different parts. Okay. As mentioned before, we've got special RFP terms and conditions. This is where things will, that would be project specific. So first part there, those project specific definitions, that's just being copied and pasted out of what you submitted in your sourcing request. But this would be, we've got some preloaded in here for state procurement analysts. But as we'll see in a little bit, it really just gets copied and pasted from a document that you work on with your SPA. Right, scope of work, this is where it's copied in from the scope template. Evaluation plan, this was previously called, I think, proposal evaluation. We just provide some more information there to make it easier to read and understand for our proposers. If they have a better idea of how we're going to evaluate our RFP, the idea is that it's more transparent to them and they're less likely to protest. And we've got our sample contract. One thing we will be looking on is, see, I've got the standard contract terms and conditions header there. We haven't made any changes to the sample contract at this point, but one thing we will be looking at is maybe using that concept of standard terms and conditions and special terms and conditions in the sample contract as well. So that's something we'll be looking at. So stay tuned for that. We would like to get it to where it's not, these huge, long back and forth to get the contract where it needs to be. Right, protest information, all out in one spot again for transparency. They don't have to go dig and try to find where we hid how they submit a protest. Before, if you're familiar with the admin and general information, it's got this these boxes where this information only applies to hard copy proposal submittal. To make things easier and look better, we just pulled all that information out into its own attachment. So now if a proposer wants to submit by hard copy, everything on how to do that is included in this attachment. And then that brings us to the final attachment in here, which is actually their proposal. So these are the proposal forms that were discussed, and they're broken up into 7 parts. Part 1 is proposer information, acknowledgements, and certifications. This is your kind of a combination of your cover letter and the old certification statement that we used to do. So this has information about the company and then gets into the debarment saying that they didn't collude with anybody, and we've got it set up fairly easily with check boxes for them. And then signature lines to submit their proposal. Technical proposal goes in part 2. Most of this are just headings for what would go in here because it's going to be very specific to what's in your RFP. Can show you kind of one that the live projects that we did that's out right now on kind of what this looks like there. Part 3 is your financial proposal. This is really just information on how to submit the financial proposal. Financial proposal is the price schedule that we're currently doing. Part 4 is Veteran and Hudson Initiative. Again, check boxes where they can just check, are they certified? Are they not? And these next two, particularly this part 5 on proposed modifications to sample contract, we've completed one RFP with this, and it allowed us to negotiate 5 contracts in about 2 weeks total time. So we think this will be a huge benefit on your side. Under our current process, we asked them to submit a red line copy of what they want to change on the sample contract with LESA 2.0. That'll still happen, but they also have to fill out this table. So they have to say what they want to change here, what their proposed language is, why they want to change it, and then the risks and benefits to the state of accepting the change. What we have in there is if it's not listed in this table, we're not going to consider it. If they put it in the table but didn't give us a red line copy, we're not going to consider it either. So that should very quickly move us through contract negotiation. Because it gives you that opportunity to see just up front. You're not relying on what we get a lot of times now is we welcome the opportunity to negotiate this contract with you, and we have no idea what all they're wanting to change. Let's see. Got a couple questions in here, but we'll get to those nearly done with this document. All right, part 6 is claim of business confidentiality. This is kind of similar to the proposed modifications to sample contract, but this deals with the redacted copy. So in addition to the redacted copy, they have to fill out this table telling us what they want to put as confidential and why. And then they sign saying that how the process is going to work, I guess. This was some legal information that we got OGC to look over as well. And then part 7 is just the electronic vendor payment solution. Okay, got a question asking about will the 2.0 changes only affect projects where the sourcing request was created after July 1? Mostly, definitely any sourcing request after July 1 will pick up the new process. Our analysts are looking at, and we actually do have some out now that we're using the 2.0 template. If you had, I believe, Nicole or Sterling, I think it's just those two. As your analyst, you're using this new template right now. So some of them that were early in the process, like if you submitted your sourcing request June 15th, it may pick up with 2.0. Main reason for that being this proposal forms that you see have made things a lot easier, both on us for the state as well as the suppliers, the proposers who will submit their information. But that'll all be clearly communicated in individual projects. We're not going to stop something to try to go backwards and slow it down. So it'll be, we maybe just had the kickoff meeting. So we're going to go ahead and just switch over and get everything done. And that goes into the next question was for RFPs already in process, will they have to be updated with these new forms? So the answer, I guess that's that old Tom's favorite answer, I think, is it depends. Anytime somebody asks a question about procurement. We've kind of mixed some of these too. So you'll see some that have kind of the old documents combined with this attachment H for the proposal. So it's really more about where we are in the process and how fast we can get things out. Okay, so this is the full template mentioned in spots. It's, copying and pasting over. So we'll go with those, starting with special RFP terms and conditions. Really, most of these are just going to look like what we just saw. And that's by design. The idea being that you work on it here, and then all that needs to happen is copy and paste the document out into the other one. So all this really is a copy and paste out. Main difference being when it's here and when the agency sees it here, you'll only be able to make a comment on it. Everything in here is fully editable though. Okay. Scope of work template. If any of y'all have been very observant, this was actually changed a month or two ago. Really the only changes are these Roman numerals. Before it was like 1.0 and 1.1. We just changed the formatting of the sections. Everything else is the exact same there. All right, proposer questionnaire document. This is where you come through. Again, it's just changing stuff. We don't have to go through and decide what's the answer type anymore, because they're all going to be submitted as attachments. So this was restructured just to do that, along with some instructional information in there. One of the things we'll try to work on, particularly with recurring RFPs, is preloading some questions in there for you. So we'll look at previous strengths and weaknesses, try to distill those out into some questions that we can add. And so we'll kind of preload those. We have had some success. Some agencies have enjoyed that part of it when we were able to do that. Might not be for every single RFP, but some of them we'll definitely have our analysts try to do that. All right, sample contract. This is similar to the scope in that nothing really changed in here, including the format. We couldn't get a way to fix the format without messing something else up on the back end. So they kept the 1.0 and 2.0. The main difference here is just we've got some instructional information and changing the format of what needs to be filled in. All right. So we've kind of seen the document. And now we're going to look at what this looks like in a dummy project, and then I'll jump to something live so you can kind of see what it looks like from the proposer side. I should also add, if your agency had customizations built in, those are still there. So, Medicaid legal still comes in at the place where we discussed it, for instance. So that's all taken there. This project isn't any of those agencies, so it's kind of a generic one. We'll look at the tasks to just kind of see what those look like. First thing you'll see is we change the phase names to more accurately describe what part of the process we're in. So first part is RFP documentation. We've embedded some training videos in, so you can see a second tab. Probably need to make that a little bigger for you. Maybe that's okay. So we have this a few of these built in throughout the process. It's a link to a YouTube video. All of these are like 10 minutes or less, roughly, but they should help with the idea of trying to provide some context for the next thing that we're going to try to do. Okay. This next one, this is going to look like a lot. So when you first see this, it looks like a lot more tasks than what you're doing. Everything that's in here is what we're currently doing. We just broke them all out into individual tasks. Instead of sending that one task that shoots 8 documents to you, now we've got them all on an individual task so that you can focus on just the single document. So instead of sending the price schedule and the special RFP terms and conditions and the sample question or sample contract and the proposer questionnaire all at one time to you, we can now just say, we're working on special RFP terms and conditions. Here's the review task for that. That doesn't mean that some of these can't be combined together to send, at the same time. They'll just be in separate tasks, so you'll be able to focus a little bit closer. One of the asks we heard from agencies as well was that maybe some people in the OSP management chain weren't seeing revisions until later in the process, and it was frustrating then that you thought you had finished a document and now all of a sudden it needed more revisions. So we're trying to balance the need for that, not having that gap with the amount of time it takes to send something through the entire OSP chain. So what we came up with is we do have OSP review for each of these documents to be done in conjunction with the project lead work. But that's not going to go to the assistant director. So you may still have some later down the line from the assistant director, but the idea is that hopefully there aren't too many changes needed at that point. And again, it's only if your project has to come to an assistant director over here. All right. So close that up. Once you get all those documents created, they're dropped into that main template. We've moved up creation of the event up, and we'll see what the event looks like. It's a lot more simple now. Then the OSP review of the RFP. This is the first time it would come to an assistant director. And then you can see we've moved the project team kickoff meeting to just before approval to publish the event. Everything else is roughly the same, so we won't go through these tasks. They've just been moved around. So publication handles everything that's occurring while the RFP is on the street. Evaluation and award is everything that's occurring once the RFP opens and until we post the award. Okay. So documents tab, RFP documents has been restructured just a little bit to match with the new documents. And the reason flipped over here is this training videos folder. So we've got 3 links to 3 videos there. And the idea is that we'll probably expand this library just a little bit. Comment on the project team or question about the project team confidentiality. So you see that here. This is one thing, just to be honest, it's kind of not sure how to handle it. And that's because once somebody's added to the team, even if we're not actively doing something with them. So for instance, we've added our evaluators maybe a month before we get to the project team kickoff meeting. We've just added them to the project. They can still go in the system and look at everything we're doing. So we still need to send the confidentiality statement out to everybody that's on the Teams tab when they're added to the team, even if we're not actively working with that person yet. So this is probably what you're going to see in a live project is multiple tasks that say project team confidentiality statement. Because the idea is when we create this project, if I flip to the team tab, you'll see it's the same as what it was before. But we're probably not going to be adding evaluation committee until a little bit later down the road. But we may have observers who just aren't actively working while we're working with our project leads, and we'll need them to sign that project team confidentiality statement. So we're gonna have to see how that works, and then we can always just fall back to we don't add anybody but the project lead until we get to this next project team kickoff meeting. Something asking about deleting references to attachments in the contract template. If attachments will not be used. I'm not sure if they meant the contract template or LESA 2.0 template. So we'll say what we're doing with these, and you'll see some of these. If you remember back, we used to have the not applicable to this RFP language. We're going to use that too, because then we don't have to go through the whole document again and try to find everywhere we changed attachment B. If we deleted out attachment B, now we have to move them all up and change attachment C scope of work to attachment B scope of work. All that takes time, and then you're going to miss something as well. So not applicable there. The sample contract, I think we went with generic names for the attachments instead. But the sample contract, the idea also is that we're going to be heavily revising that, so that you would take care of that as you're revising the document. Question on providing a link for the PowerPoint. PowerPoint, the way it's set up is probably not terribly useful if you don't have the audio. But we're definitely providing a link to the recording of this webinar. Whoa, what just happened? Okay. Got 4 minutes left and need to show you all the event. So some of this I can go a little bit over on time. And again, we'll put the recording out there too if you have to leave. Some type of welcome email with instructions description will be sent to the team before the task for confidentiality statement. Yes, we're not just going to send something to somebody and they see something and just go, what is this? Why did it show up in my email? So yeah, once they're added to the team, there'll be something going on that says you've been added to this RFP. You can log in and view it, but you're not going to be actively working on it yet. We'll have a kickoff meeting to bring you up to speed when we get to that point. Sourcing requests, a question about, do we need to add all team members at the sourcing request stage, or can they be added later? That's where we actually eliminate it. There's nowhere to even put the evaluation committee on the sourcing request now. We left spots for observers, and then you've got the people, if you need them in the approval chain before it comes to OSP, they have to be added. But OSP would be perfectly fine with 2 people on your team tab on the sourcing request. One being the person who created it, who in most cases becomes the project lead, and the agency approver. The other approvals in there are at agency discretion. So if you're adding agency legal into your sourcing request, you will need to add somebody to the agency legal team on the team tab, for instance. Okay. Can we get the template documents before creating a sourcing request? No. The LESA 2.0 template is a procurement function, and it's going to live in the sourcing project. Can you explain the difference between the proposer questionnaire and proposal submittal form? The proposer questionnaire becomes the proposal submittal form. We left the name of the document in here as the proposer questionnaire because we didn't want to confuse agencies and have a bunch of different names. So we tried to keep things similar. But in the 2.0 template, it never says proposer questionnaire. So specifically, the proposer questionnaire is going to be part 2, technical proposal. Once it gets, where to have it? Okay. So the idea is once this is done, this red instructional language goes away, and then our state procurement analyst should be able to just copy and paste this over into here under the technical proposal part. Okay. So I'm going to jump over to an RFP that's published. It's this was published nearly 2 months ago now, so it's not all the updated stuff, but the format is what we're doing in the event with LESA 2.0. So this is our statewide IT staffing support. But you can see we've got section 1, request for proposal, with this is, that LESA 2.0 template that we saw. And then the second section is the response, and we've got parts for them to submit. So these are the questions that kind of in it. Probably should have shown what these look like now, just if I could get a good side by side. This is a lot cleaner this way. So you can see for this one that part 4 is Hudson Veteran. Instead of having it just deleted out, we leave it as part 4 and just say it's not applicable for this RFP. And that way it keeps everything as, part 5 is section 2.5, part 6 is section 2.6. And then when we have addenda, they go down the line. Right, to see what this looks like from the proposer's perspective and how it's a lot more simple. Instead of having to dig through or scroll down to read all of the RFP information, as well as download multiple documents, everything's just kind of this one spot right now. So to read the RFP, they just download it. Internally, that also helps because they can distribute it out to the people who need to respond. We've got this as a PDF, but then all of the proposer sections are provided to them as Word documents in here as well. So instead of having to figure out how to convert the PDF or maybe giving it into us in a format that we don't want, we've got the Word versions for them. So if we look at this one, had 2 evaluation factors: company background and experience, and approach and methodology. All of the questions on company background and experience, we open this up, we can see what that looks like. Oops. this case, we just had one single question for it. But they would fill this out and then attach it right here. Let me open up one that has multiple questions so we can see that better, what that might look like. So you can see under approach and methodology, we have 5 questions here with room for the proposers to provide their answers under each one. So they'd fill out the Word document, they can convert it to PDF. If they want to add drawings or anything, they can do that. We just want them to answer everything in this 1 through 5 order. Somebody said, did I hear correctly that we can't access any of the documents before we create the sourcing project? No, so the agency creates the sourcing request, state procurement creates the sourcing project from your sourcing request. The sourcing request is project-specific definitions and acronyms and your scope of work. And that's all you need to focus on, and that's all you need to do to submit and start the RFP process. So your focus is on the scope and getting the best scope that you can. All of the additional stuff that we consider to be the big RFP, most of which are the RFP terms and conditions, those are in the template and that's boilerplate. So that's not changing. And all of that starts getting added in the document coming together into the single RFP once the sourcing project is created. Okay. So that's what that looks like. I'm going to jump to an older one if I can find it. Yep, here we go. Let's use this one. Just for those of you who maybe forgot what this looks like, we'll look and see real quick the previous events. The system will cooperate. All right, so this is an example of what we were doing, I guess, up until July 1st. As you can see from a proposer perspective, if I look at it, I have to read all of this. I have to download to like 4 separate documents. I have to fill in all this information separately. And if I'm not the person who can answer some of this stuff, I have to go ask somebody else instead of just sending them the document to fill out. Somebody sending me a bunch of questions through here. So what we've seen is this simplifies everything. As said, in practice, we've done a few like this, and they moved much quicker. We were able to publish in less than 60 days for the projects, the 2 projects that we were working on that we used our LESA 2.0 concepts on. I don't expect that to be the norm, at least at the beginning, but that's certainly the goal that we're trying to get to, is much quicker and as close to, we want to be able to have it look at weeks and potentially days versus months. Okay. So that is the information we have for today. Any questions that you may have, if you're not currently working in a project, you can email lesa@la.gov. With your questions, we can get those answers back to you. If you're currently working in a project that's picking up LESA 2.0 or even not, you can definitely also ask your state procurement analyst any questions you might have. And again, we will be posting this webinar at some point. Not sure if we'll get to that today, might be tomorrow or early next week. And we look forward to working with you. We will still continue the continuous improvement. So as we identify issues that just aren't, or things that aren't working out the way we anticipate them, we're going to make that change. This don't anticipate needing a LESA 3.0 with more major changes, but we'll definitely be making tweaks to get us to best in class RFPs, with the goal of being kind of somebody that other states look to for the RFP process. So thanks for attending, and looking forward to getting these RFPs moving quickly. Have a good rest of your day.